Welcome. What can I get for you?
How many kids do you have? I've got
It's somebody, and I got a call from
Mostly
his
eight.
Oh, that's so good to
The
hear.
population of London, Ontario is
Oh, I'm
about
sorry, I only have
383,800.
You started about 6 months ago. Like you've lost a lot.
Hey, I love what you did.
Yes, I'm sorry. Everything doesn't have to be about you. You want me to just do this, do that. Let's do what you're trying to do. I want to be what you want to do. Where's that life? So let me go.
Awesome. What is up, Inside Out? How are you guys doing? Awesome. Well, my name is Klein, Thompson, and I am super excited that all of you guys are here tonight. We are continuing the series Voices. And last week, Jeremy Edelin kicked off this series in week 1. And basically, throughout this series, we are going to be continuing the conversation all about how we have these voices and emotions and feelings, and how sometimes they kind of get in the way, and sometimes they influence our outcome and how we behave and react to a situation. And so tonight, that's what we're going to be continuing to talk about. In fact, I have a funny story that happened a little bit recently that has to do with this idea of letting these voices kind of take over and affect my reaction in a situation. And it's funny looking back on it. It wasn't funny in the moment, but what happened was I recently got my license, and I was driving in the car with my friend Grace, and it was nighttime. We were headed back from a football game. We were at a light, and the light looked like this. It was obviously nighttime, but we had a green arrow and a green circle. We were good to go. And by the time the car in front of us got to the intersection, the light was yellow, and the oncoming traffic was still stopped. We were still good, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to go for it. We're going to be all right. So I was going into the intersection, and by the time I was in like the middle-ish area, turning left, the oncoming traffic was stopped, like I said, and this huge truck flashed their brights into my side window. And I was like, okay, yeah, I know this is not a smart move. Like, I'm an aceable driver. I know that wasn't right of me. And so I'm going through the intersection, and I'm like, okay, sorry, like I know that was bad. And I was looking out my right mirror or window, and I wasn't looking at the curb at this point. So I turned a little bit too close, and the next thing I knew, my car was like legit airborne over this curb, like going like 35. Like it wasn't like a light, like I barely hit the curb, like I was flying over it. And so by the time my car hit earth again, I was standing there like I wasn't standing, I was sitting, and I was like, oh my gosh, what did I just do, Grace? And like I've only had my license a few months. My car is like personal to me. It's like my child. And I was like, I think it's broken. Like, I don't even know if it's drivable. And I'm like freaking out within like 10 seconds. I'm like kind of crying. I'm like kind of shaking. I'm like looking at Grace, and she's like, you literally like ran over a curb, like you're fine. And I'm like, no, like Grace, you don't understand. Like this is my new car. Like what if it's like broken on the bottom? We need to pull over. Like I'm freaking out. I'm scared. So we get to where we're going. We park. I ended up like crawling under my car with the flashlight. Like, do I need to tell my parents? Like the bumper was that like that before we left? Like freaking out. And what's funny to me looking back on that situation is in the moment, what happened was I let the voices that were telling me, I'm a bad driver and everything's falling apart and you just broke your car. I was listening to these voices and letting them affect how I saw this situation. So Grace was over here. She was chilling. She wasn't freaking out, and she was like, you just ran over a curb. But I, on the other hand, was letting these voices affect how I saw the situation. I was crying. For the next 2 weeks, I drove like this, like everywhere I went. I was like scared to do anything wrong. And that was kind of one of the ideas that Jeremy introduced to us last week. And it's the idea that the voices you choose to believe will determine the future you experience. So regardless of the circumstances, whether they're good, whether they're bad, the way that you view them and the way that you look at them is going to end up ultimately affecting this situation. It's kind of like that idea, that quote that's like, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Have any of you guys ever gone into a math test and you're like, I'm not prepared for this, and you get to the first problem and you're like, okay, this was definitely on the review last night, and it's definitely the same problem, definitely the same number, but I have no idea to where to start. And you're like, oh my gosh. And then maybe you've gone into an interview or a conversation and you know it's gonna be awkward, and you go in and you're like, oh, this is gonna be terrible. And you're halfway through it and you're like, this is so much worse than I thought it was gonna be. This is going awful. Because you went into it with that mindset. Or maybe you went into a project and you're gonna go present your project, and you realize that you spent so much time working on the project, not enough time working on what you were gonna say. So you get up there and you're like, So like we did a project on and then it just goes terrible from there because you came in with this idea or this perception that it was going to go wrong, and that ended up affecting your outcome. And so last week, what Jeremy did for us is he introduced us to 5 voices, or 5 categories almost, of emotions that we think and voices that we listen to. And so tonight, what I want to do is I want to reintroduce those 5 voices for you guys that were here and introduce them to you guys that weren't here, just to start us off. So these were the 5 voices that Jeremy talked about and introduced to us last week. And he said the first 3 of these voices are a little bit more negative. They're voices that can negatively impact our outcome. And the last 2 are more positive. They will affect the future in a more positive light. And so the first of the 5 voices is the voice of the world. And the voice of the world just kind of sounds like you're not good enough for society. Like you need to be better. You need to have more likes and comments and influence. You need to be prettier and skinnier and faster and stronger. And it's that voice that's like, I need and I need and I need. That would be the voice of the world. Then there's the voice of the flesh. And the voice of the flesh, I like to think of it as kind of like the YOLO voice. It's like, everything's going to be all right. Like, do what you want. No one's going to find out. Like, go there, do that, experience that. It's all going to be all right. That would be the voice of the flesh. And then there's the voice of the enemy. And it sounds exactly like what you think your enemy would say to you. It's like, everything's falling apart. Like, you are terrible. You are a burden. No one wants to hear that. Things are not going to be all right. That would be the voice of your enemy. So those were the first 3 that Jeremy talked about. Then he introduced us to the voice of the soul. And the voice of the soul is like those moments where you were like, I was made to do this. It's the moment that you step on the court or on the field, in the classroom, in that group of people, and you were like, I was created to do something like this. It's the moments where you feel like you have purpose, the moments where you feel like you were made for this, that you were significant, that you play a role. It's those moments where you're like, my character matters, and I want to do good things for other people, and I want to be nice to other people, and I want other people to like me. It's those moments where you're inspired by something, and you're like, I want to go do something differently. I want to go change something. That would be the voice of the soul. And then finally, the 5th voice that Jeremy introduced to us was the voice of God. And the voice of God sounds like, I love you and I adore you and you are significant, you have a purpose, you play a role, I'm here for you, and I created you exactly how I want you to be. That would be the voice of God. So last week, Jeremy introduced us to these 5 voices. And depending on what voice you choose to focus in on, or what voice you choose to tune into, is going to ultimately affect your outcome. I would even say that most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind. Like before you even step into the arena, before you even step into that situation, your mindset is your game plan. And that is going to ultimately affect what happens. Because the mind is a battlefield, and that voice that you choose to focus in on will affect the outcome. So what I want to get to the bottom of tonight, what I want to focus in on, the question that I kind of want to answer is it possible for us to focus in on the voices that we want to hear? Is it possible to maximize the volume of those ones while minimizing the voice of minimize the volume of the voices that we don't want to hear? Is that even possible? Can we do that? And if we can, what does that look like and how do we do that? So that's what I want to talk about tonight. And to do that, I want to take a look at what a guy named Paul says. And Paul lived 2,000 years ago. He's an author in the Bible. And what I find so interesting about the fact that we get to look back at what Paul says is that he was just like a normal guy. Like he had emotions. He went through things. And I think a lot of the time I think back to like people 2,000 years ago, and I forget that like they too struggled with voices. They too listened to the wrong voice at times. And that also affected the outcome of the situation for their lives. So I think it's interesting that we get to look back at what Paul says about this exact thing, and how he says that we can take the power away from the voices. So this is what Paul says to us in 2 Corinthians. He says this. He says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And I love this because Paul kind of relates it back to that idea of like a battlefield and how the mind is a battlefield. And he says anything that sets itself up against God is like the enemy. And what we need to do is take those thoughts captive, and make them obedient to Christ. And I love the word captive here because it reminds me, like I said, of like that battlefield, that idea of when you're in war, like a prisoner of war, like a hostage. When you take someone captive, they're alive, they're still there, they still exist, but you now have control of them. Think kind of like a jail cell right here. Like your thoughts are in your mind, and you have the power to take them captive and put them away. Take them captive almost like a jail cell. And whenever you take your thoughts captive, they're still there. So whenever you kind of push the negative voices away, they're still there. They're still going to come up. But now you have the power. Think about it like a prisoner, right? If they're in their cell and you have the key, you are the only way that they are getting out of that cell. And if you don't intentionally go over and unlock and release them, they are stuck there. They are at the mercy of you because you have the power now. And that's what Paul's illustrating, is this idea of what if we took those voices, the ones that we didn't want to listen to, the ones that had kind of a negative impact on our life, and we were able to kind of put them away, lock them up, and have control of them, right? They're still going to be there. They're still going to come up. They're still going to exist. But now we have the key. We know where they are. We know what they sound like. We know what they look like. And we are better able to control them. My question to Paul would be, okay, Paul, that is important. I understand that. That's cool, taking your thoughts captive. But why can't I just think more happy thoughts? Why can't I just try to think less bad thoughts? Why is it so important that I take my thoughts captive? Why is that the thing that you say we must do? And I think what Paul would say would be something along the lines of this, that the life that you have is a reflection of the thoughts that you think. The life you have is a reflection of the thoughts you think. It's not necessarily a reflection of your circumstances, your relationships, your finances, your status. It's how you view those things. That is the direction that your life will move. I would even go as far to say that your life is moving in the direction of your greatest thoughts. So what you think is most true about yourself, most true about your relationships and your status, your past, present, future, that is the direction that your life is moving, regardless of if you know it, regardless of you like it or not. That's the direction that your life is moving. So I think the reason that Paul thinks this is so important is because we want our lives to move in a better direction. And the only way to do this is to take captive our thoughts. That's why it is important, is because the life that you have is a reflection of the thoughts that you think. So tonight what I want to do is I want to give us all some practical steps to taking our thoughts captive, some tools to kind of what this looks like, how do we do this in our own lives. And there's a couple that I want to share with you guys. You can take what you want, leave what you want. But the first thing that I think is super important to do when you kind of wake up, you have that day where it's I'm not living my best life, things aren't going well, I'm not in a good mood. You know when you wake up and you know that? The first thing that I think is super important that we do is label the emotion, right? You wake up, you know you're in a bad mood, but are you upset? Are you angry? Are you mad at someone? Are you frustrated? Are you jealous? Label that emotion. The second thing that I think is important that we do when we start to feel this way, we're overcome with this voice, is to identify the voice. This may be the most important advice that I can give you tonight, is to identify the voice. Simply by asking yourself a question whose voice is that? Who is the person that told me that? Yeah, I'm feeling sad, but what voice is making me feel that way? Be able to identify that voice. Ask yourself a question like that. The third thing that I think is super beneficial for all of us to do when we start to be overcome with a voice and we start to feel a certain way is to focus in on the truth. Focus in on what is true in that situation. This looks like a lot of different things. Maybe for you it's praying. And you just have to sit down and talk to God and say, I'm overcome with this voice. This is what's going on right now. And I need you to clarify what the truth is in this situation. And maybe you're in the room tonight and you're not a Christian. That would be weird to pray for you. I totally understand that. Maybe for you, it's simply sitting down, getting a paper, a pen, and writing out how you're feeling in that moment. Writing out what you were overcome with in the moment. What is that voice for you? Going back on that, just reflecting about what you're writing. Asking yourself at the end, whose voice is that I am listening to? Another way to do this is to sit across from someone else and ask them to reflect back on you the truth. Maybe a small group leader, a trusted friend, an adult, and saying, you know what? This is what's going on right now, and I don't know how to fix it. This voice is so loud for me. I don't know how to turn it down. What is the truth? And have someone reflect that back to you. I don't know about you guys, but if the voices I listen to are my game plan, I want as many people on the other side of me reflecting back what the truth is, right? I want to have a good game plan. I want my life moving in a good direction. I want to let as many people in, and I want to talk to as many people that can reflect back to me what the truth is in that situation. That's a huge one, focusing in on the truth. The final step I want to share with you guys tonight is to evaluate the outcome. Evaluate the outcome if you choose to listen to that voice. So let's say, for example, I'm really, really focused in right now on the voice of the world, and it's really overcoming me, and I don't know what to do about it. Well, evaluating the outcome of the voice of the world would be like saying, okay, if I listen to the voice of the world, my life is going to move in the direction of that. I'm going to start to find my identity and my self-worth in my possessions and my status, and one day when I wake up and I don't have everything that I want, and I'm not where I want to be, I'm going to come to the conclusion that I'm worthless. I'm going to come to the conclusion that I don't have a purpose, because that would be the outcome of listening to the voice of the world. So it's something as simple as that, is simply just evaluating the outcome. So these are just a couple steps. Again, like I said, take what you want, leave what you want. But I think some sort of format like this, Paul would say yes to. I think Paul would say yes. That is how we take captive our thoughts. We're still going to have them. They're still going to come up. We're still going to struggle with them. But we must take them captive. Do something like this to attentively try to listen to the voices that we want to, and try to turn down the voices that we don't. And for me personally, I've definitely struggled with voices in my own life for a while now. And one that is just so loud for me, like every single day I wake up and I hear it, I go to bed and I hear it, and it's like I can't do much sometimes to get rid of it, is the voice of the world that says, you're not good enough. And it's happened for a really long time. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know if it's because I have an older brother and I feel like I have to meet the expectations that he set. I don't know if it's because I'm just like a perfectionist at heart, but this voice is so real for me all the time. And sometimes life just kind of starts to feel like a mess as a result of this voice. It starts to feel like nothing is going right and that everything is so overwhelming. I start to tell myself stuff like this, Klein, practice didn't go well today. The game's not going to go well tonight. You didn't do good enough. I start to tell myself stuff like, you know what? You can't be 5 places at once. You're not a good friend. You can't show up in all of these people's lives. You're slacking as a friend. You're not good enough. I start to tell myself things at school, and I'm like, you know what? That wasn't good enough. You didn't put your best self forward. I start to tell myself, like, people have these expectations for you, and you can't live up to them, but they don't know that about you yet. And then it gets so loud, and these voices are so loud, and they have so much power over me that I don't know what to do, and I wake up some days, and my life just feels like this. It feels like a mess. And some of you guys tonight, you walked in and your life feels like this right now. Like the voices feel loud and you don't know what to do about it. In fact, earlier this week, I came in Thursday, it was like 3 days ago, and I sat right here on the edge of the stage during my run-through. And a run-through is basically, you come in during the week and you get prepared for your message, you do a little run-through of what it's gonna look like. And I got like halfway through it, maybe. I was like right to this slide, I was almost done. And it was just too real. Like I stood up here and I like paused and I was looking back. I knew that was my next slide. And I just couldn't bring myself to admit that this voice was so loud for me. And I took my mic off. I sat right here and I cried for like 25, 30 minutes because I was like, this is too real. Like my life feels like this sometimes. Like these voices that I hear, I give way too much power to. And the truth is the thing about this voice is that there's some truth to it. And the truth is that without God, I am not good enough. And so it took me realizing on the stage like 3 days ago that I'm trying so hard to do it on my own. I'm trying so hard to pick up these pieces and then they just come back. But the thing that I was missing was listening to God. And what God says about me is that I am good enough. So when I have these voices that tell me that I mess up sometimes and I'm going to fall short sometimes, God's like, yeah, you will, but that doesn't matter because I love you. And that's the voice that I have to listen to. When I want to clean up my life, when I want to get rid of this mess and turn down those voices, I have to pick up the pieces and I have to ask God, whose voice is this? What is the truth in this, God? What do you say about me? Because ultimately, when it comes to all of these voices, regardless of if your voice sounds like that or not, when I give it to God, when we give it to God, it helps take away its power, helps take those thoughts captive. And it becomes a lot easier to clean up your life and turn those voices down. And I don't know about you guys, but I would love if my life didn't look like this mess sometimes. I would love if I was able to turn down that volume and focus and ask God. So regardless of what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking in the moment, the most important thing, the thing that would benefit us all, is if we stopped and we asked God what he thinks about that. If we looked first to God and not to the world, not to our enemy, not to the other voices, but we asked God first what he says about this. So as we head into small groups in just a minute, I want to ask you guys a question. I just want to ask you guys, what is the loudest voice for you? What is the voice that you just can't seem to get rid of? You can't seem to get away from it. You can't seem to escape it. What is the voice that is the loudest for you all the time, that you continuously are in a cycle of hearing? And I want you guys to ask yourselves as you head into small groups and as you're in small groups, whose voice is that? Whose voice is telling you that? Who told you that thing that you continue to believe about yourselves? Because I think stopping and asking ourselves a question like this can really help take captive our thoughts. But before we head into small groups, I would love to pray for you guys really quickly. Dear God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for Inside Out, just a place where we can come and we can belong and we can hang out and we can spend time together. I just pray in small groups today, God, that we can be vulnerable and we can talk about what the loudest voices in our head are. The voices that we don't want to talk about, the voices that are hard to admit sometimes, the voices that kind of consume us. And I just pray that we can all ask ourselves honestly, whose voice is that? And we could choose to look to you, not our feelings, not our thoughts, but we could choose to look to you first and understand what you say about us and how that holds truth, God. I pray that we can have a great time in our small groups and a great time this week. Pray this all in your son's name. Amen.